Nevertheless, it seems that from the financial and economic standpoint, it's perhaps not a satisfactory equilibrium, but it has become a stable equilibrium, or is that too complacent?
Well, basically, as I say, the financial crisis is over, because the question whether euro is stable or is here to stay or not has been resolved. It's definitely here to stay as long as the European Union is here, which is not necessarily forever. But within that situation, the original purpose of the euro is European Union are lost.
Given, though, that there is no longer the financial pressure on the euro and the threat of an imminent euro breakdown, what is the incentive, if any, for the leadership of Europe, and I guess particularly for the leadership of Germany, to change anything?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has already been a modification in the German attitude, because the policies that Germany has been imposing on Eurozone, the policy of austerity, was counterproductive, and it made the situation of the debtor countries worse. And they have actually more or less tacitly acknowledged that, and they have stopped pushing the debtor countries under the water, and therefore they're getting some oxygen, and they're beginning to breathe. And that's what you see in the financial markets. And so the Eurozone as a whole has hit bottom. And when you hit bottom, you have a natural rebound in the financial markets. Mm-hmm. And that's what has happened in the last few months, and is continuing. But within that bottoming, that has been brought about by a continuing aggravation of the divergence between creditors and debtors. It's not an even playing field, because in addition to all the accumulated debt, the debtor countries have a continuing handicap of having to pay more for credit. And that's not only for the government bonds, but also for business. And that is a serious, I mean, it's not a very big gap, and it has narrowed. So in that sense, there's been some relief. But it's still an ongoing additional burden that they have to absorb every year.
And that is therefore, in your view, going to continue to widen the gap between the more successful and the struggling countries, whereas previously the history of Europe was a convergence. We're now into a divergence phase.
And you can see how what the bottom is, how the stability is achieved by Germany moving ahead, and let's say Italy falling less than Germany is rising, and that's how you get the evening out.
But for Europe as a whole, as you've said, the situation seems to have stabilized, and yet in a number of the articles you've written recently, you've predicted very firmly an extremely depressing long-term outlook. I think you've said that at best Europe, under the present arrangements, should anticipate a decade or more of stagnation, at least as bad as what has happened in Japan. Are you still confident of that?
Well, I think this is now becoming recognized, the accepted wisdom, namely the threat of deflation. Mm-hmm. It's now recognized by practically all the authorities, with the possible exception of the legal department of the Bundesbank, but certainly recognized by the ECB, and it's expected that something has to be done. But so the problem is recognized, but actually a solution hasn't been found. The solution that the other central banks found was quantitative easing, and so everybody expects that the ECB may also be moving in there. But actually, the problem in the Eurozone is different from what it was in let's say, in the United States, because the ECB has been very successful in pumping money into the banking system. But the money doesn't go from the banking system into the real economy. The banking system is currently not functioning as an efficient transmission mechanism. And that's because the banks haven't yet been, let's say, the balance sheets haven't been cleaned up. They are lagging in that respect, both behind Britain and the United States. And now they are facing asset quality review and then a stress test. And for a bank to have to sell additional shares at a discount from asset value is a dilution for the shareholders, and therefore their first objective is to avoid that. And that means that they are trying to gather all the equity they can get hold of to pass the stress test.
So they're still trapped in a vicious circle, but this is something that Mario Draghi has talked about a lot himself, as the failure of the transmission mechanism. Do you think there's a prospect that this transmission mechanism is on the way to being repaired, which is what the ECB would like us to believe? And in that case, is the problem actually going to be resolved? And can Europe look forward to a different outlook?
Well, I think as I say, the problem is understood, and the remedy is to find ways of pumping additional monies into the small and medium enterprises that are particularly hurting. Unfortunately, that will take a long time. Because somebody has to take the equity risk. And here there is a role for the private sector. Actually, there is a role for hedge funds, among others, because that's really how you can, they are qualified to take the equity risk that bureaucratic organizations are not. So the European Investment Bank has to be involved, and you need to find some incentives to get equity investors involved by giving them additional credit concessional credit facilities.
And these are the kind of changes that might well be acceptable to some of the political leadership in Europe and even in Germany. But I wanted to just to step back now to the relationship between these financial and economic problems and the politics, which is what a lot of your book is about. You've suggested in your book, and you said right at the beginning, that your concern is that what started off as a financial crisis and an existential threat to the euro is turning into a political and an existential threat to the political future of Europe. You've been criticized a lot in Germany for putting so much of the stress on Germany's responsibility for this unequal relationship between the creditors and debtors and so on. Why do you think it is appropriate to emphasize so much the German role in Europe as opposed to the collective responsibility of all the European states to move forward?
Well, I'd like to distinguish between blame and responsibility, because I think the responsibility is on Germany, but I'm not really blaming them because they don't themselves understand and acknowledge the situation they are in, because they are, in effect, in charge. And they find that very difficult to accept because they went out of their way to avoid that position. And they are still very reluctant to accept it. And I'm urging them to recognize reality, that they have emerged as the dominant economic power, the ones with the best credit rating, and it gives them a dominant position. And they have to live up to it. And that is, as I said, that's where the problem is, because they have gone out of their way, partly because of historical reasons, to avoid that. And it's still very much the dominant position. But I'm also greatly encouraged that the sort of having emerged as the victors, there is now a really more reasonable, rational discussion emerging in Germany. There are various groups that are coming forward with various ideas to correct the situation. So I'm hopeful of a reasoned discussion now, and I'm also rather optimistic that the book comes at a time when the public is more ready for it than it was in the past.